Longtime member of the Senate K-12 Education Committees, Senator Charles Wiger joins me now to talk a little bit more about Representative Garofalo's levy proposal. Thank you for joining us today on Capitol Report.
Thank you, Julie.
Let's begin with the fact that you are not a supporter of Representative Garofalo's proposal that would limit when levies can go to, referendums can go to voters. Why not?
Three main reasons. First, it undermines local control. It's a slap in the face to local school boards. Let them decide. Secondly, it confuses the levy issue to the voters with the cacophony of issues, of candidates that are on a general election ballot. This potentially adds to the confusion. And thirdly, most fundamentally, I would characterize it as a ruse, as a way of covering up the problem in public education funding, and let's focus on what needs to get done so we don't have to have all these levies in the first place.
We asked Representative Garofalo about that, and we used your quotes about it being a ruse, and he countered that many of the issues with funding for K-12 education occurred when the DFL was the majority. What's your response?
Okay. Well, in terms of what the majority was able to do for public schools, it was done in the context of what was negotiated with Governor Pawlenty. Recall that a number of proposals were vetoed, and so we had to live within that framework. We have very fundamentally not met the constitutional obligation to fund our schools. Article 13 of the Constitution, very simple, 2 sentences. It calls for a general uniform system of our public schools, and it doesn't say some schools should receive dramatically more than others in terms of the opportunities. So we have not met that constitutional obligation, and Democrats and Republicans need to do more to achieve that.
So with 113 districts having gone to the voters this past week asking for $900 million in levy requests,
yes,
a majority of those were approved. What message does that send to you?
The message said there's strong support for public education, and I'm pleased for those districts. Actually, it's the best results in over 10 years. I believe 1997 we had a higher rate of passage. But that said, what about those districts where it didn't pass? I feel bad for those parents, the students in those districts who are going to be deprived that educational opportunity that all students in Minnesota should have access to. I don't think that we should have, for operating levies, this myriad of requirements of having to go to the voters each time. These are not frills. This is to provide for the basic education of students. 90% of districts are required to do it, and yes, it's good to get that support from nearly 80% in the most recent round, but they shouldn't have to do it. We should get serious about our constitutional obligation to adequately fund our schools and the mandates that we have expected our schools to provide.
Working off of that argument, Representative Garofalo also contends that K-12 funding did increase $650 million this year. He's quoted, "I think it is responsible for taxpayers to ask how that increase is being spent before approving a second increase." Do you think the onus of some of the budget concerns does fall on the public?
Of course, the public needs to be involved in a dialogue, and let's be real frank about what happened. The majority party went and borrowed $2 billion. They just kicked the can. On the backs of students, $2 billion has been borrowed. Sure, you give some money in the formula, but $50, and then there's the additional funds. Partly it's just to account for special education and some other growth that we had, but it is not nearly consistent with the pace of inflation. And so, yes, there was a modest increase, but look at the facts. We actually kicked the can, $2 billion. The school districts have to borrow money to do it. So I believe that's a very disingenuous argument.
And we're going to talk about that borrowing in just a second, but I do want to wrap up my question on the levy request and the Representative Garofalo's his proposal. Some of his key arguments, of course, include lower voter turnout tend to happen in these odd years, et cetera. Do any of his arguments hold weight with you?
None of them.
Okay. Okay, so let's go on to borrowing.
And I might say they don't hold much weight with this caucus either. Speaker Zellers issued a statement soon after Representative Garofalo's first outburst on the various local levies, and the Republican Speaker of the House issued a letter in September to the School Boards Association. It's online, saying we support local control. I support local control.
Okay, Senator, real quickly, I want to jump to this borrowing issue and a proposal that's gaining some momentum, Racino. Now, if approved, it would help pay for Viking Stadium, and it was incorporated that it would help pay back school districts some of that shift that you had spoken about earlier more quickly. Would you support a Racino proposal if the schools are a part of it?
If the schools are a part of it, I would tend to be supportive if it's in the mix. I do not think, though, that it's a good long-term solution to be basing our constitutional obligation for funding schools on gambling. To get us out of a short-term mess, yes, I will look at it. It's a mess that we didn't create. It's a mess that I did not support during the recent legislative session, but for the good of the students, we do need to bail out, and I certainly would look at it and would be inclined to support it.
Okay, with that, Senator Chuck Wiger, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Julie.